Some people think empaths are weak, too emotional, too sensitive, too soft for this world. But psychology tells a completely different story, because the most dangerous person in any room is often the one who feels everything. The dangerous empath is not dangerous because they scream. They are dangerous because they observe. While everyone else is busy talking, reacting, defending, proving, performing, the empath is studying micro-expressions, tone shifts, emotional inconsistencies, hidden intentions, and neuroscience shows this ability is real. Research on mirror neurons suggests certain people process emotional signals with extraordinary sensitivity. Their brains unconsciously absorb emotional information faster than average people. They detect tension before words are spoken. They notice emotional leakage before deception is exposed. That means the empath often knows what someone feels before that person admits it to themselves. And that level of perception becomes terrifying when the empath stops being naive. Because there are two versions of an empath: the healing empath and the awakened empath. The healing empath gives people endless chances. The awakened. Empath studies human nature. At first, empaths usually become targets. Manipulators love emotionally intelligent people because empathy creates patience. Empathy creates forgiveness. Empathy creates understanding. And predators survive through understanding people better than they understand themselves. But eventually something changes. The empath experiences betrayal enough times that their emotional intelligence evolves into pattern recognition. Now they no longer just feel emotions. They predict behavior. This is where the dangerous empath is born. Behavioral psychology shows that humans are extremely repetitive creatures. Most people repeat the same emotional cycles, the same manipulation tactics, and the same defense mechanisms over and over. The empath notices these loops. They notice how insecure people over-explain, how narcissistic people subtly redirect conversations, how guilty people suddenly become overly kind, how deceptive people freeze for half a second before answering direct questions. Most people miss these signals. Empaths don't. And once they see the pattern, they cannot unsee it. That's why dangerous empaths become emotionally detached in ways people don't expect. Not cold, calculated. There's a difference. Cold people stop caring. Calculated empaths still care, but they stop sacrificing themselves for people who weaponize kindness. This transformation changes the empath's body language too. Psychologists know emotional exhaustion alters social behavior dramatically. People who experience chronic emotional betrayal often develop heightened observational awareness. They speak less, watch more, reveal less information, and suddenly everyone around them feels uncomfortable. Not because the empath said something threatening, but because people feel psychologically exposed around them. The dangerous empath has a terrifying ability: silence. Most people cannot tolerate silence because silence forces emotional exposure. Manipulators especially rely on emotional chaos. They need reactions. They need explanations. They need emotional access. The dangerous empath removes all of it. No emotional outburst. No dramatic confrontation. No desperate pleading. Just distance. And distance psychologically destroys people who relied on controlling emotional energy. That's why some of the most emotionally powerful people were born. Become extremely quiet. Not weak, aware. There's another reason dangerous empaths are hard to defeat. They understand pain, and pain creates adaptive intelligence. Studies on trauma and emotional hypervigilance show that emotionally sensitive people often become exceptionally skilled at reading environmental threats. Their nervous systems adapt to detect emotional danger faster than average individuals. In unhealthy forms, this creates anxiety. But in controlled forms, it creates human lie detectors. The dangerous empath enters a room and instantly feels who is competing, who is insecure, who wants approval, who wants control, and who is emotionally unstable. And here's the frightening part. They rarely announce what they know. They simply adjust. That adjustment is power. Because power in psychology is not loudness. Power is emotional self-control. The person who controls their emotional reactions usually controls the interaction. And dangerous empaths eventually master emotional restraint. They learn that reacting emotionally gives manipulative people information. so they stop reacting publicly. Now, the manipulator has no data, no weakness to exploit, no emote. Why-onal opening, no predictable trigger. That unpredictability makes the empath psychologically intimidating. But here's where most people misunderstand the dangerous empath completely. Their greatest weapon is not revenge, it's withdrawal. Once an empath emotionally disconnects, reconnecting becomes nearly impossible. Why? Because emotionally intelligent people attach deeply but detach completely once trust is broken beyond repair. Neuroscience suggests emotional betrayal activates the same pain regions of the brain associated with physical injury. Over time, the brain learns to avoid repeated emotional damage through protective emotional distancing. Most people think danger is loud. They imagine aggression, domination, threats. But psychology has discovered something far more unsettling. The human nervous system fears silent observation more than open conflict. Because when someone reacts emotionally, you can predict them. But when someone only watches, you never know what they understand. And this is exactly why the dangerous empath terrifies people without saying a word. At first glance, they seem harmless, quiet, understanding, emotionally available. But beneath that cowl, surface, something extraordinary is happening inside the brain. Neuroscientists studying emotional intelligence discovered that highly sensitive individuals process facial expressions, tone changes, and emotional signals faster than average people. Some studies suggest the brain can detect emotional inconsistencies in milliseconds before conscious awareness even begins. Think about that. Before someone finishes speaking, the empath's nervous system may already sense deception. And the terrifying part is, most people never realize they are being studied. Research from behavioral psychology shows humans leak emotion constantly. Tiny facial movements called microexpressions reveal fear, guilt, insecurity, and hidden intentions before the conscious mind regains control. A fake smile lasts too long. A confident voice cracks for half a second. A forced laugh arrives too late. Most people miss these signals entirely. The dangerous empath does not. Because while others are focused on words, the empath is focused on patterns, and human beings are creatures of patterns. Studies in neuroscience reveal that nearly 95% of human behavior operates unconsciously. Most people repeat emotional bits every single day without realizing it. The same reactions, the same manipulation tactics, the same insecurities disguised in different forms. The empath notices all of it. They notice how insecure people interrupt constantly because silence makes them feel invisible. They notice how manipulative people ask personal questions but reveal almost nothing about themselves. They notice how jealous people disguise criticism as advice. And once the empath sees the pattern, they cannot stop seeing it. That's when something changes socially. People begin feeling strangely exposed around them. Not because the empath attacked them, because the empath noticed them. Psychologists call this emotional mirroring awareness. Human beings unconsciously fear people who perceive their authentic emotional state. Studies show the brain experiences social exposure similarly to physical danger. Heart rate increases, cortisol rises, defensive behavior activates. In simple terms, being deeply understood can feel terrifying, especially for people hiding behind performance. And modern society is built on performance. Research shows the average person alters their personality depending on who they are around. Different voice, different opinions, different emotional masks. But the dangerous empath tracks emotional consistency instead of personality performance. That means they can often tell when someone is pretending long before others realize it. And this creates an almost supernatural effect. People start saying things like, "I feel like you can read me," but the empath is not reading minds. They are reading behavior. The human body reveals the truth constantly. In fact, neuroscientists discovered the body reacts to stress and deception before language can fully control facial muscles. That means emotional leakage happens automatically. A jaw tightens. Breathing shifts. Eye contact changes. Blink rate increases. The dangerous empath notices these microscopic shifts instinctively, not because they trained for years like an interrogator, but because emotional sensitivity wired their brain to observe survival signals constantly. And this ability often comes from pain. What most people never understand is that dangerous empaths are rarely born peaceful. They are created through emotional overload. Studies on trauma and hypervigilance reveal that emotionally sensitive people exposed to unstable environments often develop heightened observational awareness as a survival adaptation. Their brains become scanning machines. Who is angry? Who is lying? Who is emotionally unsafe? Who is about to explode? The nervous system learns to predict danger before danger arrives. And over time, this transforms into extraordinary social perception. The empath enters a room and immediately senses tension nobody else notices. A fake friendship, hidden resentment, competition disguised as support. And because they feel everything intensely, their intuition becomes frighteningly accurate. But here is where the dangerous empath becomes different from the ordinary empath. They stop reacting immediately. That silence changes everything. Because most people reveal themselves through emotional reactions. When humans become angry, defensive, jealous, or insecure, self-control decreases dramatically. Neuroscience shows emotional arousal weakens rational filtering in the brain, causing hidden emotions to leak into behavior. The dangerous empath understands this unconsciously. So instead of interrupting, they wait. And waiting is psychological power. Because silence creates pressure. The longer our silence lasts, the more uncomfortable, emotionally dishonest people become. Eventually they over-explain, contradict themselves, reveal insecurity, expose motives unintentionally, and the empath simply watches. This is why manipulators often fear emotionally intelligent people. Manipulation depends on emotional confusion. But the dangerous empath studies emotional structure itself. They notice inconsistencies between words and actions. And behavioral science confirms something shocking. Actions predict personality far more accurately than language ever will. Anyone can perform kindness temporarily, but patterns never lie. The dangerous empath understands that repeated behavior is identity. Not promises, not apologies, not emotional speeches, patterns. That's why emotionally intelligent observers become difficult to deceive over time, because they stop listening emotionally and start watching scientifically. And this completely changes the way they move through life. They speak less, reveal less, observe more, not because they are cold, because they learned that information is power. Psychological research shows people who talk excessively often reveal emotional weaknesses unintentionally. Typically, in contrast, highly observant individuals gather information while exposing very little about themselves. That imbalance creates silent control in conversations, and most people never even notice it happening. They leave interactions feeling emotionally analyzed without understanding why. Some even become defensive around the empath for no visible reason, because subconsciously, humans detect observation. We are biologically wired to feel when attention becomes intensely focused on us, and when someone observes without reacting emotionally, it creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates anxiety. That is why calm observers often appear more intimidating than aggressive people. Aggression is predictable. Observation is not. The dangerous empath understands something most people never learn. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The most powerful person is usually the one paying attention, the one studying emotional energy, behavioral shifts, social dynamics, hidden intentions. And once an empath masters emotional restraint, their perception becomes nearly impossible to manipulate, because now they are no longer drowning in emotions. They are navigating through. Rough them consciously. That transformation is dangerous, not because the empath wants revenge, but because clarity changes human behavior forever. Once someone learns how to truly observe people, they can never return to emotional blindness again. And maybe that is what frightens people most about the dangerous empath. Not their silence, not their intuition, not even their emotional intelligence, but the horrifying realization that while everyone else was busy performing, the empath was quietly seeing the truth the entire time. Nobody becomes a dangerous empath by accident. People think empaths are simply born sensitive, but psychology suggests something darker. The most emotionally perceptive people are often shaped through pain so intense, their nervous system never fully forgets it. and that changes the brain forever. Studies in neuroscience reveal that emotional trauma physically alters neural pathways. The brain becomes hyper-alert to emotional danger, constantly scanning for signs of rejection, betrayal, anger, or deception. In other words, pain trains perception. That's why many dangerous empaths were once the kindest people in the room. The most patient, the most forgiving, the most emotionally available, until life taught them a brutal lesson. Kindness without boundaries attracts predators. Research in behavioral psychology shows manipulative personalities often target highly empathetic individuals because empathy increases tolerance. Empaths naturally try to understand behavior instead of immediately defending themselves. And manipulators survive through emotional confusion. At first, the empath excuses everything. They're just hurting. They didn't mean it. They've been through a lot. But every betrayal leaves a psychological scar. And the human nervous system remembers emotional pain with terrifying accuracy. Brain scans reveal that emotional rejection activates the same regions associated with physical injury. The pain of betrayal is not metaphorical. To the brain, emotional damage and physical damage overlap neurologically. That means every humiliation, every manipulation, every emotional abandonment leaves biological residue inside the body. Elevated cortisol, chronic stress responses, sleep disruption, emotional hypervigilance. Some studies even show prolonged emotional stress weakens the immune system and accelerates aging. Think about that. Certain people can emotionally wound the body itself, and eventually the empath realizes something terrifying. Being emotionally open without protection becomes self-destruction. That realization changes everything, because pain forces evolution. In nature, survival belongs to organisms that adapt fastest to danger. Human psychology works the same way. The empath slowly stops reacting emotionally the way they once did. Not because they stopped caring, but because their nervous system learned caution. Now they notice things they ignored before. The delayed text that suddenly feels intentional. The fake concern hidden inside criticism. The subtle disrespect disguised as humor. The emotional inconsistency between someone's words and actions. And once the empath notices these patterns repeatedly, trust becomes harder to give. Psychologists call this adaptive pattern recognition. The brain builds predictive models from repeated emotional experiences. After enough betrayal, the nervous system starts identifying similar behavioral traits before conscious reasoning even begins. That's why experienced empaths often say, "I had a bad feeling immediately." And science suggests that feeling may be partially real. The subconscious brain processes massive amounts of emotional information beneath conscious awareness. Tiny inconsistencies trigger internal alarm systems long before logic catches up. The dangerous empath learns to trust those alarms. But here's the painful part nobody talks about. The transformation is lonely, because when the empath evolves emotionally, their social world changes completely. People who once benefited from unlimited emotional access suddenly lose control, and human beings react aggressively when access disappears. Research shows social rejection activates panic responses inside the brain. When emotionally manipulative people lose influence over someone they once controlled, frustration and obsession often increase dramatically. That's why some people become cruel the moment the empath starts healing. The empath begins setting boundaries. Suddenly they are called cold, difficult, different, selfish. But psychology reveals a disturbing truth. People often preferred the empath wounded, because wounded empaths are easier to control. A healed empath becomes dangerous because they stop negotiating with emotional disrespect. And this change, their body language too. Studies on confidence and trauma recovery show emotional healing alters posture, eye contact, speech patterns, and nervous system regulation. People recovering from emotional manipulation often become calmer, slower in speech, and more selective socially. Why? Because survival taught them observation is safer than impulsive trust. Now the empath walks into a room differently, not seeking validation, not begging for acceptance, not emotionally chasing connection, just observing. And observation creates power, because most people expose themselves eventually. Research in communication psychology shows liars and manipulators struggle maintaining long-term behavioral consistency. Over time, contradictions appear naturally through stress, emotional pressure, and cognitive overload. The dangerous empath knows this, so they stop forcing truth out of people. They simply wait, and time reveals everything. That patience becomes psychologically intimidating, because emotionally reactive people expect reactions, arguments, defensiveness, emotional chaos. But the evolved empath often responds with silence, and silence is deeply misunderstood. Silence is not weakness. Neuroscientists found that silence during conflict increases psychological discomfort because the human brain craves emotional predictability. When someone refuses to emotionally react, the other person often experiences internal instability. That's why calm people make manipulators nervous. No emotional leverage, no visible trigger, no predictable weakness. The dangerous empath learned emotional restraint through suffering. Every betrayal strengthened observation. Every disappointment sharpened intuition. Every heartbreak strengthened boundaries. Pain became training. And eventually the empath realizes something life-changing. Their sensitivity was never the weakness. Unprotected sensitivity was. That distinction transforms them psychologically. Now empathy becomes strategic instead of self-destructive. They still understand emotions deeply, but they stop absorbing everyone's emotional chaos as their responsibility. This is critical because emotional overload physically damages the body. Studies on chronic empathy stress show highly sensitive individuals experience increased fatigue, anxiety, inflammation, and emotional burnout when constantly exposed to toxic social environments. The nervous system was never designed to carry everyone else's suffering endlessly. The dangerous empath finally understands this. So they protect their energy like survival depends on it, because biologically, it does. They become selective about conversations, selective about friendships, selective about emotional access. And suddenly people accuse them of changing. But what really happened is this. The empath stopped abandoning themselves to save others. That transformation is powerful beyond words, because emotionally healthy people become extremely difficult to manipulate. They no longer fear disappointing others, no longer panic when someone withdraws affection, no longer confuse emotional intensity with genuine connection. And psychologically, this is where true power begins, not domination. Self-control. The dangerous empath becomes terrifying because they understand both kindness and darkness simultaneously. They know how humans manipulate, how humans lie, how humans emotionally consume each other. But unlike manipulators, they developed awareness through suffering instead of exploitation. That difference matters. Because pain gave them emotional depth, most people will ever understand. They know what betrayal feels like in the body. They know what emotional exhaustion feels like at 3 a.m. They know what it feels like to overgive until nothing remains. And because they survived it, their perception becomes razor sharp. They can recognize emotional danger quickly because they lived through it personally. That is why healed empaths often seem almost psychic, not supernatural, experienced. Their nervous system remembers everything, every tone shift, every emotional inconsistency, every manipulative pattern. Pain trained them to notice survival signals hidden inside ordinary behavior. And maybe that is the darkest truth of all. The dangerous empath was never created by hatred. They were created by repeated emotional wounds that forced the brain, the body, and the soul to evolve until survival itself became wisdom. The most dangerous empath in the world is not the loud one, not the angry one, not the emotional one. It is the calm one, the one who learned how to feel everything without losing control. Because psychology has discovered something terrifying about human behavior. The person who controls their emotions often controls the entire interaction. And most people never realize how much power emotional restraint actually holds. Modern neuroscience shows that during emotional conflict, the rational brain begins shutting down. Stress hormones flood the nervous system. Heart rate rises. Impulse control weakens. Decision-making deteriorates. In simple terms, strong emotions make human beings predictable. That is why manipulators provoke reactions. They want anger, fear, defensiveness, confusion. Because emotional reactions expose vulnerabilities. The moment someone loses emotional control, they begin leaking information psychologically. Tone changes. Body language shifts. Speech patterns break. But the dangerous empath eventually learns something life-changing. Silence reveals more than confrontation ever will. And once they understand this, their entire personality changes. At first, empaths usually over-explain themselves. They try to fix misunderstandings, repair relationships, calm conflict, save people emotionally. But repeated betrayal changes the nervous system. Research on emotional trauma shows chronic interpersonal stress increases self-protective behavior inside the brain. The nervous system becomes more cautious, reobservant, more selective with emotional exposure. The empath slowly realizes something painful. Not everyone deserves access to their emotions. That realization creates emotional discipline. And emotional discipline is rare, because most people are controlled by their feelings without understanding them. Psychologists estimate that much of human decision-making is emotionally driven before logic even enters awareness. People believe they are rational, but emotional states quietly shape behavior constantly. Fear creates aggression. Insecurity creates arrogance. Jealousy creates criticism. Loneliness creates attachment. The dangerous empath sees all of it happening in real time. But unlike before, they stop reacting impulsively. That restraint creates psychological power most people cannot understand. Because emotionally reactive people expect emotional reactions from others. If they insult you, they expect anger. If they withdraw affection, they expect panic. If they manipulate emotionally, they expect confusion. But calmness interrupts manipulation completely. And neuroscience explains why. Studies show emotionally regulated individuals maintain stronger activity in the prefrontal (DAL) cortex during stress. This area controls reasoning, awareness, and impulse management. Meanwhile, emotionally reactive people become controlled by the amygdala, the survival center associated with fear and emotional impulsivity. That means during conflict, the calmer person often thinks more clearly. The dangerous empath learns to stay calm while others lose control. And this becomes terrifying socially, because now they are no longer emotionally available for manipulation. No panic, no emotional chasing, no desperate need for validation, just observation. That emotional detachment changes relationships dramatically. People who once controlled the empath through guilt suddenly lose access. And when emotional manipulators lose control, they often escalate behavior. Psychologists call this extinction burst behavior. When a strategy stops working, humans temporarily intensify manipulation before finally accepting loss of control. That's why some people become crueler after the empath becomes emotionally disciplined. More guilt, more blame, more emotional pressure. But the dangerous empath no longer reacts automatically, because pain taught them a brutal truth. Protecting peace is survival, and science supports this completely. Long-term emotional stress damages the body in horrifying ways. Chronic cortisol elevation increases risks of anxiety disorders, heart disease, sleep dysfunction, digestive problems, weakened immunity, and even memory impairment. Certain toxic relationships physically exhaust the nervous system. The dangerous empath finally understands this. They realize emotional chaos is not just mentally draining. It is biologically destructive. So they begin protecting their energy with ruthless precision. Not out of cruelty, out of survival. And this is where people become confused by the empath's transformation. They mistake emotional discipline for emotional coldness. But those are completely different things. Cold people stop feeling. Disciplined empaths still feel deeply. They simply stop allowing emotions to control their behavior publicly. That distinction changes everything. Because now the empath becomes unreadable. And unreadable people are psychologically intimidating. Research in social psychology shows uncertainty increases anxiety dramatically. Human beings feel safer when they can predict emotional responses. But emotionally disciplined, blind people break predictability. You cannot easily manipulate someone who pauses before reacting. You cannot easily control someone who understands emotional games. You cannot emotionally destabilize someone who already mastered their inner world. That mastery creates silent power. The dangerous empath enters arguments differently now. While others raise their voice, the empath lowers theirs. While others emotionally explode, the empath watches calmly. And strangely, this calmness often makes people more emotionally unstable, because calmness acts like a psychological mirror. It forces people to face their own emotional lack of control. That discomfort becomes unbearable for emotionally immature individuals. And here is the darkest part. The dangerous empath no longer needs to win arguments, because they already understand something deeper than victory. Behavior reveals truth automatically over time. So instead of forcing explanations, they let people expose themselves naturally. And eventually everyone does. Research shows humans struggle maintaining false emotional identities long-term. Stress, inconsistency, ego, and emotional fatigue eventually crack the mask. The dangerous. Empath learned patience through suffering. They understand time exposes character better than confrontation ever could. So they stop trying to convince people. Stop defending themselves endlessly. Stop draining their nervous system explaining truth to people committed to misunderstanding them. That silence becomes transformational, because emotionally healthy people do not chase validation constantly. And psychologically, independence creates power. The moment someone no longer fears losing approval, their behavior changes dramatically. They speak more honestly, walk away faster, set stronger boundaries, tolerate less disrespect. The dangerous empath becomes terrifying because emotional self-control removes desperation. No desperation for love. No desperation for acceptance. No desperation for emotional rescue. And human beings become extremely powerful once desperation disappears. Because desperation is what manipulators feed on. The need to be chosen. The need to be understood. The need to keep people at any cost. But the healed empath finally understands. Peace is more valuable than attachment. That realization changes the nervous system itself. Studies on emotional regulation practices show reduced cortisol, improved immune function, lower anxiety levels, stronger sleep quality, and healthier cognitive performance. Calmness heals the body, and the dangerous empath protects that calmness fiercely. Now they leave environments that drain them, leave conversations that disrespect them, leave relationships built on emotional instability, not because they are weak, because they finally learned self-preservation. And maybe that is the most dangerous transformation of all. The empath who once tolerated everything finally learns how to walk away, quietly, calmly, without revenge, without emotional chaos, just gone. And psychologically, nothing unsettles manipulative people more than losing emotional access permanently. Because the dangerous empath's greatest weapon was never anger, never intimidation, never revenge. It was emotional self-control so powerful that nobody could control them anymore.